My name is David Campbell, 38 years old, an oil field engineer out of Houston. I work 14-hour shifts on the rigs, come home with torn hands and a back that never stops aching. But I always believed I was building a life as solid as steel. A home, a wife, a wedding right on the horizon. I thought cheating was something that happened to other people. Tabloid headlines, afternoon talk shows. Never me. Then, in the very week we were supposed to walk down the aisle, Ashley, the woman I loved, the woman I thought I'd call my wife forever, looked me dead in the eye and dropped 6 words that still split my chest open. I need one last night with Ryan. Her ex, right before our wedding. Do you know what I did? I didn't scream. I didn't throw the ring. I turned, walked out the door, and left everything behind in silence. From that moment on, my life was never the same. I've spent most of my adult life in Houston, the kind of city that never sleeps, where the skyline is lit by refineries and office towers. I'm an oil field engineer, the guy who makes sure freight moves, crews show up, and steel platforms hold when the Gulf throws its worst storms at us. It's not glamorous work. Most days I come home covered in sweat and concrete dust, too tired to talk, too sore to do much but kick off my boots and collapse on the couch. But I always thought that sacrifice meant something, that the long hours, the missed dinners, the nights alone on offshore rigs were all investments in the life Ashley and I were building. I wanted her to feel safe, to know we'd never go without. Houston was tough, but it was ours. The apartment near Midtown, late-night tacos after my shifts, Sundays at the community church. I thought that was enough, until I realized it wasn't. I can still remember the first time I saw Ashley. It wasn't at some fancy party or through friends. It was in the aisle of a Barnes & Noble in Houston. I'd just gotten off a 12-hour shift, still in my work boots, looking for a book on mechanical systems that might help me land a promotion. She was there in the fiction section, a paperback in her hands, hair tucked behind her ear, completely lost in another world. I don't know what made me speak up. Maybe the exhaustion stripped away my usual caution. I asked if she could recommend something that wasn't a manual, something that might remind me life was bigger than steel and schedules. She laughed, soft but sure, and handed me a novel I'd never have picked for myself. We stood there, surrounded by shelves and strangers, talking like we already knew each other. That night, for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. In the beginning, it wasn't grand gestures or expensive dates that defined us. Ashley and I built something out of the small, ordinary moments that somehow felt extraordinary. We'd grab coffee after church on Sundays, sit in a corner booth at a diner off Highway 59, and talk until the waitress had to remind us they were closing. She'd tease me about the grease under my fingernails. I'd tease her about dog-earing every page of her books. We didn't have much money back then. Most of my paycheck went to rent and gas. But we had laughter. Nights on the couch with takeout pizza, watching old movies. Drives down I-10 with the windows rolled down, radio too loud, singing along badly to Tom Petty. When the world felt heavy, Ashley had this way of making it light, reminding me there was more to life than deadlines and paychecks. Those early days felt like a promise, that love, if tended right, could carry us anywhere. Looking back, what set Ashley and me apart in those early years wasn't fireworks or drama, it was patience. She was steady where I was restless, gentle where I was stubborn. When I'd come home bone-tired from the field, she never complained. She'd sit beside me with her grading papers or a novel, and somehow her quiet presence gave me strength. We built trust one brick at a time. I told her about my father walking out when I was a kid, and how I swore I'd never do that to the family I'd build. She shared how she'd lost her mom young, and how she carried that ache into adulthood. We weren't trying to impress each other. We were just real. And when life tested us, missed paychecks, busted cars, long stretches where I was offshore, Ashley didn't flinch. She waited. She listened. She believed in me. That trust, that patience, it felt like the strongest foundation a man could ask for. I'll never forget that weekend trip to Folsom Lake. It wasn't fancy. We packed an old cooler, a couple of folding chairs, and drove out of Houston before sunrise just to escape the noise. By the time we got there, the water was still, the air sharp with pine, and for the first time in months, I felt like life had slowed down enough to breathe. I'd been carrying that ring in my pocket for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Not in a restaurant, not at a crowded party. I wanted it to be simple, just her and me. So as the sun set and painted the water in gold, I turned to Ashley. My hands shook. Me, a man who wrangles heavy steel and drills through rock, shaking like a kid. I told her she was my anchor, my safe harbor, and I didn't want a life without her. Then I pulled out the ring. Her eyes filled, and she whispered one word that changed everything. Yes. After she said yes at Folsom Lake, life moved fast. Within months, we signed a lease on a small apartment in Midtown Houston. It wasn't much, just 2 bedrooms, thin walls, and a view of a parking lot, but it was ours. We painted the kitchen together, argued over curtain colors, and laughed when the old AC unit rattled so loud we had to turn up the TV. Every spare dollar went to 2 things: fixing up that apartment and saving for the wedding. Ashley kept a binder full of notes and fabric samples. I'd come home exhausted from the field, and she'd wave receipts at me, talking about centerpieces and invitations. I didn't mind. Seeing her so alive, so excited, it reminded me why all the long hours were worth it. At night, lying in that apartment surrounded by half-built furniture and stacks of wedding magazines, I thought, this is the American dream. Messy, noisy, imperfect, but ours. It didn't happen all at once. At first, I told myself it was the stress of wedding planning, the late nights she spent balancing work and picking out flower arrangements. But little by little, I felt her slipping away. She used to greet me at the door, arms around my neck, asking how the rig was, laughing at my stories about the guys. Now, more often than not, I'd find her on the couch, phone in hand, barely glancing up when I walked in. The conversations grew shorter. Dinner turned into silence, punctuated only by Sophie's chatter when she visited, or the hum of the TV we weren't really watching. In bed, she rolled to her side before I'd even turned off the lamp. I tried to brush it off. Every couple goes through dry spells, right? But the look in her eyes had changed. Where there used to be warmth, I started to see something colder. A distance I couldn't name, but could feel in my bones. It was the little things that started to eat at me. Ashley used to leave her phone on the counter, screen up, half the time with messages from friends I already knew popping across the glass. But now, almost overnight, it was always face down. At dinner, she'd flip it the moment I walked in. While we sat on the couch, if a text buzzed, her hand moved faster than mine ever could, sliding it into her lap like it was something private, something I wasn't meant to see. I told myself not to be paranoid. People deserve privacy. But when you've spent years trusting someone with your whole life, those tiny shifts feel like earthquakes. I'd ask, "Who was that?" And she'd shrug, "Just work." Her tone was too casual, too practiced, and I could feel it. The distance between us wasn't just silence anymore. It was secrets. Secrets she didn't trust me with. And secrets have a way of burning down everything you've built. It was the little things that started to eat at me. Ashley used to leave her phone on the counter, screen up, half the time with messages from friends I already knew popping across the glass. But now, almost overnight, it was always face down. At dinner, she'd flip it the moment I walked in. While we sat on the couch, if a text buzzed, her hand moved faster than mine ever could, sliding it into her lap like it was something private, something I wasn't meant to see. I told myself not to be paranoid. People deserve privacy. But when you've spent years trusting someone with your whole life, those tiny shifts feel like earthquakes. I'd ask, "Who was that?" And she'd shrug, "Just work." Her tone was too casual, too practiced. And I could feel it. The distance between us wasn't just silence anymore. It was secrets. Secrets she didn't trust me with. And secrets have a way of burning down everything you've built. I've spent my whole career in logistics, schedules, routes, paper trails. If something didn't add up, you tracked it until it did. So that's what I started doing with Ashley. I didn't confront her. I didn't accuse. Instead, I bought a small notebook from the gas station down the street and slipped it into my work bag. Every time she left for yoga, I wrote down the time she walked out, the time she came back, what excuse she gave. Tuesday, left at 6:05, returned at 8:12. Thursday, said she was with a friend, came back smelling like perfume I didn't recognize. I hated myself for it, felt like some jealous teenager spying on his girlfriend, but part of me needed to know if I was losing my mind, or if I was finally seeing what had been right in front of me. With every note, my suspicion grew heavier. The man I was, proud, trusting, was being replaced by someone I barely recognized. The first real crack showed up on a Wednesday night. I was folding laundry in the living room. Nothing romantic, just trying to help, just trying to be near her. I picked up one of Ashley's blouses, held it to fold, and froze. The smell hit me before the fabric even touched my hands. It wasn't her perfume. Ashley always wore something light, floral, familiar. This was heavier, sharper, musky, like cologne mixed with something sweet. I stood there, blouse in hand, heart pounding, trying to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe a coworker hugged her. Maybe she sprayed something at a store, but once you smell betrayal, you can't unsmell it. I shoved the blouse into the basket, hands trembling. When she came home, I kissed her cheek, but my mind was already miles away. For the first time in 12 years, I doubted not just her words, but her touch. That scent clung to me all night, whispering a truth I wasn't ready to face. One Saturday, we planned to go grocery shopping together. Nothing special, just milk, bread, the usual. At the last minute, Ashley pressed a hand to her temple and said she had a headache. "You go ahead without me," she whispered. I hesitated but nodded, figuring she needed rest. I drove to H-E-B, wandered the aisles, half distracted, replaying that perfume in my mind. When I pulled back into the apartment complex 40 minutes later, her car was gone. No note, no text, just an empty parking spot where her silver sedan should have been. My chest tightened as I carried the bags inside, calling out her name. Silence. When she returned an hour later, I asked where she'd gone. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Just for a walk." I needed space. My hands clenched around the grocery bag until the plastic nearly tore. I didn't argue, didn't accuse, but inside, something broke. Because deep down, I knew she was lying. When Ashley finally walked back through the door, she carried herself like nothing had happened. Keys jingled, shoes kicked off by the mat, calm as ever. I asked where she'd been, my voice low, steady. She didn't hesitate. "I just went for a walk, needed some air." That was it. No detail, no explanation. A walk. Alone. Something about the way she said it, the coolness, the casual shrug, cut deeper than if she'd shouted. She looked at me like a teacher correcting a child, like I was silly for even asking. And maybe I was. Maybe a husband shouldn't feel crazy for wanting to know where his fiancée disappears on a Saturday night. I carried the groceries into the kitchen, setting them down harder than I meant to. Milk sloshed, apples rolled across the counter. She didn't flinch, just grabbed a glass of water, sipping slow, avoiding my eyes. That night, the silence between us was louder than any fight could have been. I didn't push it that night. I told myself silence was safer, that if I pressed too hard, I'd either explode or drive her further away. So I nodded, sat down at the table, and pretended the room wasn't filled with smoke only I could smell. On the outside, I was calm, folding receipts, stacking groceries, asking Sophie about her homework. But inside, I was burning. Every smile Ashley gave me felt rehearsed. Every answer clipped just enough to keep me at arm's length. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, my jaw locked so tight it hurt. I wanted to shout, to demand the truth, to slam my fist on the table and say I wasn't a fool. But instead I swallowed it, the way men like me are taught to do. And as the fire roared in my chest, a darker thought crept in. Maybe she counted on my silence. Maybe that was what made the lies so easy. One evening I decided to test my own sanity. I sent Ashley a quick text from the job site. Heading home in 5. Normally she'd expect me 2 hours later. I drove fast, heart hammering, headlights cutting through the Houston dusk. When I opened the door, the apartment was too quiet. No TV, no music. Then I heard the shower shut off upstairs. By the time she came down, her hair was damp, clinging to her shoulders, her robe tied too quickly, phone tucked halfway into her pocket. She smiled, casual, like nothing was off. "You're early," she said, as if the words themselves were a shield. I stood there watching the drops of water run down her neck, wondering who or what she'd been washing away. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But that night, the smell of her shampoo didn't calm me like it used to. It only raised more questions, and every answer I feared was worse than silence. Once suspicion takes root, every detail feels like a clue, and the name that kept echoing in my head was Ryan Marshall, her ex. I'd heard it before, years back, in stories Ashley told with that careful tone people use when they don't want you to ask more questions. He worked in finance, polished, the kind of man who never had dirt under his nails. One night, while she thought I was asleep, I heard her mumble his name under her breath on a phone call. Just once. Quick. She ended it fast, slipping into the bathroom, whispering behind the closed door. My chest tightened like a vice. Ryan. The man she once loved. Maybe still loved. I told myself it was a harmless, maybe business, maybe coincidence. But my gut knew better. That name was a ghost slipping back into our lives, and suddenly every lie about yoga, every damp strand of hair, carried his shadow, and I couldn't shake it. It wasn't just once. A few days later we were in the kitchen. I was rinsing dishes, she was making coffee, and her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, smiled quick, then caught herself. "Who's that?" I asked, casual. She shook her head, said, "Just a friend from work?" But then she slipped. Under her breath, soft, almost like she didn't know she'd said it. Ryan. The sound of that name in our apartment was like a match on gasoline. My hands froze in the sink. I asked again, slower this time. "Ryan who?" She went pale for half a second, then forced a laugh. "No one, just someone from years ago." She tried to wave it off, but I'd heard it, clear as day. Ryan Marshall wasn't some ghost anymore. He was right there between us, in the coffee steam, in the silence after. And in that moment, I knew, whatever was happening, it wasn't just in my head. I'd never been the type to snoop. I prided myself on trust, on giving space, but trust only works when it's earned, and Ashley's every move felt like a riddle I couldn't solve. So one Friday, while she was out running errands, I dug through an old storage box and found the nanny cam we'd used when Sophie was little. A cheap black plastic thing, lens no bigger than a dime. I set it up behind the bookshelf in the living room, angled just right at the front door and hallway. My hands shook as I plugged it in, not because I was afraid of breaking the law, but because I was breaking something else, whatever innocence was left in our marriage. That night, I sat in the garage pretending to sort tools, while inside the camera's red light blinked. I told myself it was insurance, a way to prove I wasn't crazy. But deep down I already knew. Proof doesn't heal a wound, it just makes it real. 3 days later, I sat in the garage eating cold leftovers, laptop balanced on my knees, scrolling through the footage. Most of it was nothing. Ashley coming home with grocery bags, tossing her keys on the counter, checking her phone. But then, Tuesday night at 7:03 p.m., the door opened. She stepped inside, phone pressed tight to her ear, laughing. And then I heard it, clear as day. "Yeah, no, he's still at the office. I'll call you after I shower." I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. She walked right past the camera, robe already draped over her arm, voice casual, careless. My chest caved in. She had told me it was yoga night. But there she was, standing in our home, lying without even blinking. No strange man, no lipstick stains, just her voice, calm and practiced, erasing me with a single sentence. That small, unnecessary lie cut deeper than any affair ever could. Because she didn't just deceive me, she erased me. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the TV on mute, a half-empty glass of whiskey in my hand, watching the ice melt. I kept hearing her voice in my head, that casual tone. "He's still at the office. I'll call you after I shower." She said it like she'd rehearsed it, like lying was just another line in her day. I looked around the room, our framed wedding photos, Sophie's crayon drawings stuck to the fridge, the couch we'd saved 3 months to buy. All of it felt hollow now, like I was living inside a stage set, the props of a family that no longer existed. It wasn't just that Ashley had lied. It was how easily she'd done it. No stutter, no pause, no shame. That's what gutted me. I realized, with the kind of clarity that makes your stomach turn, that the woman I trusted most had learned how to erase me with a single sentence. As much as my gut screamed betrayal, the truth was harsher in another way. I didn't have proof of an affair. No strange men caught on camera, no lipstick stains on collars, no hotel receipts tucked into her purse. Just lies. Small, casual lies that stacked up like bricks until I couldn't see daylight anymore. That made it worse in some ways. If I'd caught her with Ryan, if I'd walked in on something undeniable, I could have pointed, shouted, ended it clean. Instead, I lived in the gray, knowing she was lying, but not knowing how far the lie went. I'd sit in the dark, replaying that footage over and over, thinking, is she lying to protect me from the truth, or is she lying because the truth doesn't exist? It didn't matter. Lies rot a marriage from the inside out, and I could feel the rot spreading through ours, even without proof of another man. I realized something that night. What broke me wasn't the thought of another man's hands on her. It was the ease in her voice when she lied. No hesitation, no crack, just smooth, ordinary words that slid off her tongue like she'd practiced them 100 times before. That's what gutted me. An affair is an act. You can confront it, rage against it, walk away from it. But a lie that easy? That meant she'd already rehearsed erasing me from her world. And if she could lie about yoga, about phone calls, about where she was at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday, then what else could she erase? I sat there with that question burning a hole in my chest. The whiskey didn't numb it. The silence didn't hide it. It was clear now. Our marriage wasn't under attack from some stranger. It was crumbling from the inside, brick by brick, every time she looked me in the eye and chose a lie. I poured another glass, then another. The burn of the whiskey was sharp, but not sharp enough to cut through the ache inside me. I sat in the dark, the glow of the streetlight spilling through the blinds, staring at the ceiling as the hours bled together. Midnight, 2 a.m., 4. My eyes wouldn't close. My mind wouldn't stop. Every time I thought about shutting it down, that single line echoed in my head. He's still at the office. I'll call you after I shower. So ordinary, so clean, and yet it carried the weight of betrayal. By sunrise, the bottle was half empty, and so was I. My hands trembled, not from the liquor, but from the storm I was holding back. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, to pound the walls until the neighbors called the cops. Instead, I sat there in silence, watching the first light of morning crawl across the room, knowing sleep and peace had abandoned me. The next day, I couldn't stay in that apartment. Every corner of it felt poisoned, the couch, the kitchen, even the air. So I grabbed my keys and drove. No plan, no map, just pointed my truck west and let the wheels eat up the miles on I-10. Houston blurred in the rear view, the skyline shrinking until it was just flat Texas highway, endless asphalt stretching into nothing. I cranked the radio but didn't hear a word. My hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles ached, jaw locked, heart pounding with nowhere to land. I passed gas stations, motels, billboards advertising barbecue and bail bonds. None of it registered. I just kept driving, chasing silence, chasing distance. But the truth rode shotgun the whole way. No matter how many exits I blew past, Ashley's voice followed me. He's still at the office. I thought if I outran Houston, maybe I'd outrun the lie. But lies don't stay put. They ride with you. By the time the sun dipped low, I was too tired to keep going. I pulled off at an exit I didn't recognize, the kind of place you only see when you're running from something. A flickering neon sign buzzed over a rundown roadside motel. I paid cash, slid the key from the clerk without eye contact, and walked into a room that smelled like bleach and cigarette ghosts. The carpet was stained, the bedspread rough, the kind of place where no one asks questions. I set my bag down and sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the blank wall like it might give me answers. The silence pressed heavy, broken only by the hum of the old AC unit. I thought about calling Ashley, demanding the truth, but my phone stayed face down on the nightstand. For the first time in 12 years, I wasn't going home. That night, I realized I was no longer a husband seeking comfort. I was a man in exile. At 3 a.m, I lay flat on that stiff motel mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling, the hum of the AC rattling like a dying engine. My chest felt like stone, heavy, immovable, pressing down until every breath was work. I wasn't drunk this time, just hollow. The kind of hollow that comes when the life you built no longer feels real. I thought about the years, every overtime shift, every birthday I missed offshore, every dollar I stacked to give Ashley the life she said she wanted. I thought about Sophie's drawings on the fridge, the vows Ashley and I had whispered under the oak at Folsom Lake. And then I thought about that one sentence, tossed so easily over the phone. He's still at the office. It replayed on a loop, louder in that silence than any scream could be. And lying there, eyes burning in the dark, I realized the hardest part of betrayal isn't proof, it's doubt. The next morning, sunlight bled through the thin curtains, but it didn't feel like a new day. My head throbbed from no sleep, and my chest was still heavy as stone. I picked up my phone, thumb hovering over Ashley's name, but I couldn't do it. I didn't want more half-truths, more practiced calm. So I scrolled down and tapped another name, Tom Campbell, my cousin in College Station. Tom answered on the second ring, his voice rough, like he'd been up early feeding his cattle. "You all right, David?" he asked. I almost lied, the way I used to when work got hard, but the words came out raw. No, not even close. I told him enough, about the lies, the perfume, the late nights. He didn't interrupt, just let me spill it out. When I finished, there was a pause, then his voice low and steady. "You don't need guesses, cuz. You need the truth. And the truth always leaves tracks." Tom didn't sugarcoat it. He never has. He let me spill my guts, listened without a sound, then cut straight to the bone. "Cuz," he said, voice calm but firm, "you don't need more sleepless nights, and you sure as hell don't need guesses. You need the truth. Not paranoia, not what-ifs. Cold, hard truth." I sat there on the edge of that motel bed, staring at the stained carpet, letting his words sink in. Truth. I'd built my whole career on it. Numbers, schedules, freight routes. In my world, the facts never lie. But in my marriage, facts were shadows, and shadows were eating me alive. "So what do I do?" I finally asked. Tom didn't hesitate. "You get someone who knows how to find it. Quiet, clean, no drama. A man I know in College Station can help. Used to be a Marine, now he works as a PI. He doesn't deal in feelings, only facts." Tom gave me a name, Mason Creed. Said he was an ex-Marine, now working as a private investigator out of a cramped office above a vape shop in College Station. "He doesn't care about your feelings," Tom warned. "He cares about evidence." That was exactly what I needed. I drove up the next morning, still running on caffeine and nerves. Mason was older than me by at least 10 years. Broad shoulders, salt and pepper beard, eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and cared too little. He didn't shake my hand, didn't smile, just motioned to a chair across his desk. "She cheating?" he asked flat, like a man ordering coffee. I hesitated. "I don't know, but something's wrong. I need proof." He scribbled notes on a yellow pad, never looking up. "Give me her name, schedule, car, the places she says she goes. If she's lying, I'll find it. If she's not, you'll know." His voice was steady, final. The man sold certainty. Mason leaned back in his chair, the springs creaking under his weight. His eyes didn't blink much, just stayed locked on mine like he was reading whether I was serious. Then he spoke, short, clipped, the way I imagine he did giving orders in the Corps. Facts, not drama. The words landed like a hammer. That was exactly what I needed. I was drowning in doubts, in what-ifs, in late-night spirals that never gave me peace. Mason wasn't here to hold my hand or tell me stories. He was here to deliver answers. He slid the yellow pad across the desk. "Write down her schedule, the days she says she's at yoga, places she shops, her car, make, model, plate if you got it, any names that come up." My hand shook a little as I wrote, especially when I added one name at the bottom, Ryan Marshall. Mason just glanced at it, gave a slight grunt, and said, "We'll see." I slid the notepad back across the desk, my handwriting jagged from the tension in my hand. Every detail I could remember was there. Ashley's weekly schedule, the yoga nights that didn't add up, the times she left for errands and came home empty-handed. I even wrote down her license plate, the routes she usually took through Houston, the places she liked to stop for coffee. And at the very bottom, underlined twice, was the name I hated saying out loud. Ryan Marshall. Mason scanned it without expression, then tucked the page into a folder like it was nothing more than paperwork. "Good," he muttered. "Now let me do my job." As I stood to leave, I felt something I hadn't in weeks, relief mixed with shame. Relief that soon I'd know the truth. Shame that I'd become the kind of man who hired someone to watch the woman he loved. But silence had eaten me alive. At least facts might kill me clean. Mason didn't waste words. He tucked the folder under his arm, looked me dead in the eye, and gave a single nod. "I'll handle it." That was all. No pep talk, no false comfort. Just a promise from a man who'd probably said those same words in far darker places. I walked out of that office feeling stripped bare. The Texas sun hit me like a hammer as I stepped onto the street, but inside I was colder than I'd ever been. For weeks I'd been drowning in suspicion, circling the same questions with no answers. Now I'd handed it all over to a stranger, a Marine with a camera and a notebook, to find out if my life was built on truth or lies. Driving back to the motel, I kept repeating his words in my head. "I'll handle it." For the first time, I wasn't in control. And maybe that was the scariest part, because once the truth came, there'd be no unknowing it. I drove back to the motel in silence, the radio off, the hum of the tires on I-10 the only sound filling the cab. When I stepped into that bleach-stained room, it felt less like a place to sleep and more like a cell I'd chosen for myself. Days blurred together. I went to work, kept my head down, and came back to that same stiff bed every night. I lived like a ghost. Meals came from vending machines or drive-through bags left half-eaten on the nightstand. I stopped shaving. My phone buzzed until it went silent, Ashley's name flashing on the screen over and over. I couldn't bring myself to answer. What was there to say? The truth was coming. I'd hired a man to find it. But while I waited, I felt less like a husband, less like a father, and more like an empty shell pacing a cheap motel room, suspended between a life I'd built and one I was about to lose. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Morning, noon, midnight, it lit up like a lifeline I refused to grab. Ashley's name filled the screen over and over, sometimes with texts, sometimes with voicemails. The first few were gentle. "Where are you? Please call me." Then they grew sharper. "We need to talk." By the third day, they turned desperate. "David, I'm begging you. Don't do this." I'd sit on the edge of the bed, staring at that glowing rectangle, thumb hovering over accept. But I couldn't, because if I picked up, I knew she'd talk circles, soothe with words, patch cracks with excuses. And part of me still wanted to believe her. That was the danger. So I let every call ring out. I deleted nothing, saved every voicemail like evidence. Each unanswered call was another brick in the wall I was building between us. It was cruel, maybe, but silence felt safer than being pulled back into lies I wasn't ready to forgive. A week after I handed everything over, Mason called. His voice was flat, like he was reading from a weather report. "Tuesday, 6:15, farmer's market. Bought sunflowers. Alone." He paused, flipped a page. "Thursday, 7 o'clock. Parked outside the yoga studio, never went in. Sat in her car 15 minutes, then drove off. Alone." Another pause. "Saturday morning, Midtown Cafe, latte and a muffin, 40 minutes, no company." Each word landed heavy, not because it proved her innocence, but because it didn't prove anything at all. She wasn't caught with Ryan or anyone else. No arm around her waist, no shadow slipping into the car, just absence. Empty spaces where truth should have been. When Mason finished, I sat there in silence, gripping the phone so tight my hand ached. Alone. That word echoed, colder than I expected. Because maybe she wasn't meeting another man. Maybe she was just leaving me behind piece by piece and didn't have the courage to say it. A full week went by. Mason kept sending updates, times, places, receipts of a life that looked normal on the surface. But there was one name missing from every line: Ryan Marshall. Not once did he show up. No meetings, no late-night rendezvous, no car parked alongside hers. Just Ashley, moving through Houston like a woman with nothing to hide, and yet everything about her felt hidden from me. At first I thought I'd feel relief. No Ryan meant no affair, right? But the truth cut sharper. Because if it wasn't him, then what was it? Why the lies about yoga? Why the perfume I didn't recognize? Why the phone always turned face down? I sat in that motel bed staring at the manila envelope Mason had given me, and for the first time I wasn't sure which outcome scared me more, that Ashley was cheating or that she wasn't, and the distance between us was simply who we had become. The longer Mason reported back with nothing, the more I started turning the blade inward. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe all those long hours offshore, the late nights when I came home too tired to talk, the times I half listened with one eye on the TV, they'd carved something out of us I hadn't noticed. I replayed years in my head, missed anniversaries, birthday dinners cut short, Ashley sitting alone in the bleachers while I worked overtime. Had I pushed her so far into silence that lies felt easier than honesty? Maybe she wasn't sneaking off to Ryan. Maybe she was just escaping me. That thought cut deeper than proof of an affair ever could. Because if it was Ryan, I could hate him, blame him. But if it was me, if I had slowly driven her to a place where she felt invisible, then I wasn't the victim. I was the architect of my own collapse, and I didn't know which truth I feared more. There were nights, sitting in that motel with nothing but the hum of the air conditioner and Mason's sparse reports, when I wondered if I'd made a monster out of shadows. Maybe Ashley wasn't betraying me. Maybe she was just lost. People drift, don't they? The fire cools, the routines take over, and two people who swore forever wake up one day as strangers sharing the same bed. I thought about her stress, the way she carried lesson plans home from school, the dark circles under her eyes when she fell asleep grading papers at the kitchen table. Maybe her lies weren't about another man at all. Maybe they were about hiding the truth of how unhappy she'd become, with herself, with me, with the life we thought we wanted. That possibility terrified me more than infidelity. Because you can fight another man. You can't fight a slow, quiet fading. And I didn't know how to bring her back if she didn't want to return. No matter how many times I tried to convince myself Ashley was just tired, just lost, the memory of that night at Rutherford's Steakhouse wouldn't let me go. I can still see it, dim lights, jazz humming low, our anniversary dinner meant to be a reset. Then Ryan Marshall walked in, and everything shifted. I remember the way Ashley straightened her posture, the way her eyes lit up when she saw him. And when he asked her to dance, I told her no. I told her we were having dinner, that it was our night. But she stood anyway. She put her hand in his like it belonged there. That image burned into me. The chandelier light catching her smile, the turn of her body under his hand while I sat at the table alone. It wasn't a dance, it was a message. And no matter what Mason's report said, that moment replayed in my mind as the purest proof of betrayal. 2 weeks passed. Mason handed me folder after folder, every page stamped with times, places, photos. Ashley at the farmer's market with flowers in hand. Ashley sipping coffee at Midtown. Ashley sitting alone in her car outside the yoga studio before driving away. The pages filled, but not once did Ryan Marshall appear. Not once. It should have been a relief, but instead it hollowed me out. Because if Ryan wasn't there, then who was she lying for? Why cover her tracks if she had nothing to hide? Mason's notes were neat, clinical, proof of movement, not meaning. Observed subject, no third party present. Again and again. I'd sit in that motel, flipping through those pages like a man reading his own obituary. No smoking gun, no clinching moment, just silence documented in black and white. And the more I stared at the emptiness, the more I realized, sometimes absence is louder than presence. Sometimes nothing is the cruelest answer. Mason slid the folder across the desk, his tone as flat as always. "She's not sleeping with anyone," he said, tapping a finger on the stack of reports. "Shotachi Trontrain." The words hung in the air heavier than proof of an affair ever could. Trontrain. Avoidance. It wasn't lipstick on a collar. It wasn't another man's car parked outside our apartment. It was emptiness. It was lies about yoga, about errands, about nothing at all. Lies that built a wall between us brick by brick. I sat there gripping the folder, wanting to argue, wanting him to tell me I'd been right all along, that Ryan was back, that there was a clear villain I could point to. But Mason just leaned back, arms folded. "Sometimes lying doesn't mean cheating," he said. "Sometimes it means hiding. From you, from herself, from the truth she doesn't want to face. And that cut deeper than if he'd shown me pictures of her with someone else. I walked out of Mason's office with that folder clutched under my arm like it carried a death sentence. The manila edges cut into my palm, but I barely felt it. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for nearly an hour, staring at the traffic on Folsom Boulevard, trying to breathe past the hollowness in my chest. The folder was supposed to give me answers, proof, something solid to stand on. Instead, it felt like it had scooped me out from the inside. Every page told me the same thing. She was lying, but not about another man. Lying about where she went, lying about her time, lying about nothing. And somehow, that made it worse. Because betrayal of the body, you can fight. Betrayal of the heart, you can grieve. But betrayal by silence, by emptiness, that leaves you with nothing to swing at, nothing to bury, nothing to forgive, just a hollow shell where your marriage used to be. Back at the motel, I laid the folder on the table and just stared at it. Page after page confirmed what Mason had said. There was no third man, no Ryan slipping into her car, no stranger waiting at a cafe, just Ashley, always alone. But instead of relief, I felt something colder. Distance. A distance that wasn't measured in miles but in silence, in the small lies that piled up like bricks between us. She hadn't given her body to anyone else, but she'd withdrawn her soul from me. That's what the reports showed. Emptiness. I poured a drink, but even the whiskey tasted thin. I wanted someone to blame, someone to fight, a clean wound to stitch shut. Instead, I had shadows. A wife who wasn't cheating, but also wasn't choosing me. And sitting there in that bleach-scented room, I realized maybe the cruelest kind of betrayal isn't found in someone else's arms. It's found in the space where love used to live. I stared at my phone for hours before I finally hit her name. My thumb hovered, my chest tight, but I pressed it anyway. The line rang twice, then Ashley's voice burst through, brittle and breathless. "David? Thank God. Where are you?" I closed my eyes, swallowed hard. "I'm not coming home," I said, my voice steady though my hands shook. "Not unless something changes. And I don't mean your schedule or your smile. I need to know who I'm married to. I need to know if there's still anything left worth saving." On the other end, silence stretched, long enough that I thought she might hang up. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "I don't know. I felt invisible, David, for a long time." Her words pierced me deeper than any denial could. Because in that moment, I realized I wasn't fighting Ryan or anyone else. I was fighting the space she'd carved between us, and the part of me that let it happen. Her voice cracked, and then the sobs came, raw and unguarded. "I felt invisible," she said between breaths, "like I could be standing right in front of you, and you wouldn't see me anymore." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white. Invisible. That word cut me open, because in the quiet corners of my heart, I knew there was truth in it. I'd buried myself in work, in overtime hours, in building a life made of paychecks and walls, thinking that was love. Meanwhile, she'd been fading right in front of me. But knowing that didn't erase the lies. It didn't erase yoga nights that never happened or phone calls whispered behind closed doors. "Ashley," I said slowly, "we can't keep living like this. If I come back, it's not to patch cracks. It's to rebuild, or to end it clean." She cried harder, whispering, "I don't want to lose us." Neither did I. But wanting wasn't enough anymore. I steadied my voice, even as my chest felt like it might split open. "Then we have to learn to see each other again," I said. "Because if we don't, if we keep pretending, keep lying, keep disappearing into silence, then it's over. Do you understand me, Ashley? It's the end." On the other end of the line, all I heard was her breathing, ragged, uneven, like each word I'd spoken had knocked the air out of her. Then a choked whisper, "I understand." I leaned back against the motel wall, staring at the peeling paint, feeling both lighter and heavier all at once. For the first time in months, I'd spoken the truth out loud, laid the line down clear, rebuild or break. It wasn't a threat. It was the reality of where we stood. And in that silence, I realized something I hadn't admitted even to myself. Part of me wanted her to fight for me, to prove I was still worth seeing. The next morning, I woke up in that motel room with the decision already made. The whiskey bottles, the folders, the silence. I couldn't live in limbo anymore. So I stuffed my few clothes into a duffel, zipped it shut, and carried it out to the truck. The drive back to Houston felt longer than the one that took me away. When I pulled into our driveway, my chest tightened. The house looked the same, white porch light glowing, Sophie's bike tossed carelessly on the lawn, but it felt like enemy territory. I sat there a full minute before killing the engine. Ashley must have been watching from the window because the door opened before I even knocked. Her eyes were red, her hair tied back, no makeup. She didn't rush to me, didn't reach out. She just stepped aside, leaving the doorway open. I crossed that threshold like a soldier walking into a battlefield, not sure if I was there to fight or surrender. I hadn't even set my bag down when I heard the thunder of small feet on the hardwood. "Daddy!" Sophie's voice rang through the hallway, sharp and clear, and then she was on me, arms flung around my neck, legs wrapping my waist. The force of her hug nearly knocked me off balance, and for a second I had to grab the doorframe just to steady myself. She smelled like strawberries and shampoo, like safety and home. My throat tightened, eyes burning hot as I buried my face in her hair. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed that simple weight of her trust, the way she held on like she knew I'd never let go. "Are you staying forever this time?" she asked, her voice muffled against my shoulder. I swallowed hard. "I'm staying a while," I said. It was the only truth I could give. And in that moment, I nearly broke, because Sophie deserved certainty, and all I had left was maybe. That night, Ashley made meatloaf, my favorite. The smell hit me as soon as I walked into the kitchen, warm and familiar, like nothing had changed. She set the dish down on the table with mashed potatoes and green beans, the same way she had 100 times before. Sophie chattered about school projects, her fork clinking against the plate, completely unaware that the air between her parents was heavy as stone. I ate in silence, each bite tasting like memory. Ashley kept her eyes on her plate, glancing up only when Sophie laughed. Once, our dinners had been filled with stories, inside jokes, soft touches across the table. Now it felt like we were actors performing a scene for our daughter's sake. Still, I noticed the effort, the way she'd gone out of her way to cook something she knew I loved. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't healing, but it was a start. And in that moment, even a start felt like survival. Later that night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Ashley poured 2 glasses of red wine. She set one in front of me at the kitchen table, then sat across from me, not beside me, but across, like we were negotiating terms. For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the tick of the clock on the wall. Finally, she broke the silence. Her voice was low, trembling but deliberate. "David, I didn't sleep with him." I didn't answer right away. I stared at the glass, at the deep red swirl catching the light, and let the words hang there. Part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me knew I'd never get proof either way. When I finally looked up, she was watching me, eyes wide, pleading. I gave the smallest nod. "I know," I said. And I did know, because Mason's folder told me so. But knowing didn't erase the dance. It didn't erase the lies. It only left us in the wreckage. I let her words sit there, heavy as stone, before I finally spoke. "I know," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. I lifted the glass of wine but didn't drink. My eyes locked on hers. "But that night, you didn't choose me." Her face crumpled, lips parting as if she wanted to protest, but no sound came. She knew exactly which night I meant. Rutherford's Steakhouse, our anniversary. The moment Ryan held out his hand, and she took it, leaving me sitting alone at a table meant for 2. "It wasn't about him," she whispered, tears brimming. "It was about me, about how lost I felt." I shook my head. Lost or not, you had a choice. And in front of me, on the night that was supposed to be ours, you chose someone else, even if it was only for one song. The silence that followed was louder than any fight, because the truth had finally been named. I set the glass down, the stem clicking against the table. My voice came out steady, even though my chest felt like it was caving in. "Ashley, listen to me. I don't care if it's small. I don't care if it's something you think doesn't matter. One more lie, just one, and I'm gone. For good. Her shoulders shook as she nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I understand, she whispered. But I could see the fear in her eyes, the kind that comes when someone realizes they've run out of second chances. This isn't about catching you, I continued. It's about trust. And right now, that trust is hanging by a thread. If you cut it, there's no tying it back together. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing quietly. I didn't reach across the table. I didn't comfort her, because promises didn't mean anything anymore. Only the truth did. And for the first time, she knew the line she couldn't cross. She sat there across from me, shoulders trembling, eyes shining with tears that slipped silently down her cheeks. Then she nodded, slow, deliberate, like the weight of that promise pressed on her chest. Her lips moved, but her voice cracked too hard to finish the words. I'd seen Ashley cry before, at funerals, during arguments, when stress at work finally broke her down. But this was different. This wasn't about pain she couldn't control. This was about accountability. She understood now that there was no more space to hide, no more excuses to reach for. I'll fight for us, she finally whispered, her voice raw. I didn't answer. Not right away. Part of me wanted to take her hand, to let that vow mean something. But another part of me knew vows are cheap when spoken after betrayal. So I just nodded back, slow and cautious, letting her tears fall into the silence. For the first time, she seemed to realize she could lose me. 2 years have passed since that night at the kitchen table. We didn't fix everything in a week or even in a year. Rebuilding wasn't about grand gestures. It was about the grind, the small choices stacked day after day. Ashley kept her word. She was present. She stopped hiding behind excuses, stopped vanishing into silence. If something was wrong, she said it. If she felt invisible, she spoke it aloud instead of letting it rot in the shadows. We stumbled plenty. There were nights we still slept with our backs turned, mornings when words came out sharp and unkind. But slowly, the laughter returned. Friday takeout nights came back. Sophie's piano recitals became family outings instead of lonely events. I learned to put down my phone, to close the laptop, to actually listen. And Ashley learned that honesty, even when it hurts, is better than the cleanest lie. We weren't perfect. We were weathered. But maybe that's what made us stronger. By the second spring after everything broke, laughter had started to feel natural again. One Saturday, we packed a cooler, tossed a blanket in the truck, and drove out to Lake Travis. Sophie sang along to the radio the whole way, her little voice cracking on the high notes. And for once, Ashley and I joined in instead of sitting in silence. At the lake, Sophie chased dragonflies along the shore, her laughter echoing over the water. Ashley snapped pictures, her hair whipping in the breeze, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. We ate sandwiches under the shade of an oak, Sophie dripping mustard down her chin, all of us laughing until our stomachs hurt. For a few hours it felt like life was simple again, like the weight of lies and suspicion had burned off in the Texas sun. We weren't healed completely, but sitting there by the water with my daughter's laughter and my wife's hand brushing mine, I felt hope was still possible. Even with the laughter, even with Lake Travis afternoons and Sophie's piano recitals, the scar never fully faded. Some nights I'd catch myself watching Ashley when she wasn't looking, her face lit by the glow of the TV or bent over a book, and the memory would come back sharp as glass. The chandelier light, the music, Ryan's hand on her waist. She'd smile at me, and I'd smile back. But inside, I'd feel the crease in my brow, the question I never asked. Why? Not the why of betrayal. I'd heard her reasons. Feeling invisible, feeling lost. But the why of choice. Why him? Why then? Why not me? It wasn't anger anymore. It was a quiet ache, the kind that sits in your bones like an old injury. We'd built something back together, stronger in some ways, gentler in others. But scars don't vanish. They remind you every so often that the wound was real, and mine still whispered at night. There were moments I could see it on her face, words trembling at the edge of her lips, a weight she almost let slip. Ashley would sit across from me at breakfast, spoon stirring her coffee long after the sugar had dissolved, eyes darting up like she was about to speak, but then she'd swallow it back down, smile too quickly, change the subject. I know now what she wanted to say, that the dance with Ryan hadn't been fate, it hadn't been chance. She had seen online he was back in town, had dressed for the possibility, had taken his hand not for love, but to spark jealousy, to remind me she still mattered. She'd wanted me to fight for her, but she never said it out loud. She kept that truth buried, convinced the silence was safer than ripping open scars we'd barely stitched shut. And so the secret sat between us, unspoken, shaping everything, even as we laughed like nothing was wrong. In the end, I made a decision, not with fireworks or dramatic vows, but quietly, like setting down a heavy load. I chose to believe in Ashley's actions today, rather than the shadows of her past. She cooked dinners again, laughed with Sophie, reached for my hand in church. She painted in the sunroom, asked about my day, stayed in the room instead of drifting away. Were there ghosts? Of course. Every marriage carries them. But I realized I could spend the rest of my life cross-examining the past, searching for proof in memories that would never change. Or I could stand in the present, where my daughter's laughter was real, where my wife was trying, where I still had something worth holding. Forgiveness wasn't a single choice. It was 1,000 small ones, repeated daily. And though the scar remained, I decided to live with it, because living with a scar was better than living without them. My name is David Campbell, and if these past years have taught me anything, it's this. Truth doesn't always heal. Sometimes truth cuts deeper than silence ever could. What holds a family together isn't always perfect honesty. It's the choice to protect what still matters, to build peace where pride would rather burn it down. I didn't forgive Ashley completely. The scar remains, and maybe it always will. But I chose to stay. Not because I was weak, not because I was blind, but because I decided Sophie deserved more than watching her parents fall apart over ghosts we couldn't bury. Real strength, I've learned, isn't found in revenge or walking away to prove a point. It's found in choosing the right step, even when it costs you. For some men, that means leaving. For me, it meant staying and rebuilding, brick by brick. Because sometimes survival isn't about starting over. It's about holding steady long enough to grow again.